Hello, this is Aaron Rosen, your local realtor in Northern California. Today, I just wanted to review one of the presidential candidates' policies or proposed policies of a 3% federally backed mortgage. This is something that Robert F. Kennedy has proposed. Now, I'm not endorsing Mr. Kennedy or denouncing him, but I do think that it's very interesting that politicians are starting to think of creative ways to help bring down housing prices, or to at least increase affordability. So let's just go ahead and give a listen and see what he has to say.
We've all heard stories of 20 and 30-year-old kids who can't afford to buy a house and even can't afford rent and are moving back in with their parents. This isn't happening because young people have suddenly gotten lazy. Monthly mortgage payments for home buyers are up 20% just in the last year, and that's because interest rates have doubled. Meanwhile, the cost of the average home has gone from $250,000 to $400,000 just since 2019.
That is a huge increase, way, way, way faster than it should be going.
And those higher home prices have also driven up the cost of rent. So now Americans are paying a third of their income for rent. That's the highest ratio since records were kept. So what's happening?
And remember, that's also on a two-income household.
What's happening is BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, these giant corporations which own 88% of the S&P 500, are going into real estate. These investment firms swoop in as soon as a house comes on the market. They outbid prospective home buyers with cash offers. They add that property to their investment portfolio, and then they rent it back to you or your children at the most exorbitant rate that the market can bear. So how can our kids or the typical American homeowner win a bidding war with BlackRock? By 2030, these giant corporations are on track to own 60% of the single-family homes in our country.
So I tried to verify that and look into it, and according to the research that I found, they currently own around 2% of the homes. I looked into this. I saw the headline everywhere. Oh, they're going to own 40%. They're going to own 60%. Nobody really said how or why. I think that that's one of the things where somebody went through a calculation somewhere and then the internet exploded with the little factoid. So I wish that he would explain that a little better. I do not think that they're going to own 60% of single family homes.
BlackRock wants to be everybody's landlord and everybody's neighbor, but I'm not going to let that happen. When I get to the White House, I'm going to restore affordable home ownership to every American, and I'm going to do that without raising the national debt. And here's how I'm going to accomplish that feat. I'm going to create a federal program that backs mortgages at 3% financed by tax-free bonds. These mortgages are going to be available to people only, not corporations. This will drop mortgage payments by more than $1,000 a month for a medium-priced home and allow your children to outcompete BlackRock in the market. So here's how it works. Imagine that you had a rich uncle who was willing to co-sign your mortgage. Well, I'm going to make Uncle Sam that rich uncle. It's not a giveaway, it's a loan guarantee that makes that property affordable to millions of Americans who cannot now afford it.
So that's really interesting. I haven't been able to chase down the statistic either, but I was told that for every interest point rise, just one interest point rises, it prices out around 5 to 7% of home buyers. You can see how much it goes up depending on the house. It can go up, $300 to $500 per payment, per interest point. So that's pretty interesting. We went from basically zero rate from 2008 all the way up, and then it shot up to 5%. So, just do the math. That's 40% of homeowners that have now been priced out of the market, which in my opinion is terrible. So I can't vouch for the rest of Mr. Kennedy's proposals or his presidency or anything like that, but I think that this is a great idea.
This is just one of the policies that the Kennedy administration will deploy to create millions of new home buying opportunities at payments of less than $1,000 a month. We're also going to change the tax code to get corporations out of the single-family home market. And we're going to work with municipalities to get empty lots and derelict homes back into circulation at low prices. As President of the United States, I'm going to create a housing
That's
movement.
something that I actually was talking about as well. I think that for unpermitted structures and all things should just be able to be forgiven if brought up to code, and that would create a huge rental supply if we could increase the supply of houses, because there's a lot of stuff that's unpermitted out there. You know, being a real estate agent, you see a lot of it. There's an unpermitted room here, there's an unpermitted garage expansion there. It just happens a lot because of the fees and regulations. So this is a problem that can be attacked from a lot of different angles. I think that it should be attacked from all sides. He's talking about on the purchase side here, but we also need to be able to build more houses, which has to do with fees and regulations.
This country the same way that we did it after World War II when we made home ownership affordable for working people. If you like this video and you want to help me become President of the United States, go to Kennedy.
Okay. So, like I said, I like that someone is thinking about this. He's understanding what's a big issue for a lot of people, and he's trying to make a change about it. It's hard to know exactly what's going to be the best change, and I can't know if, his other policies are going to contradict this or not, but I hope whatever candidate wins that they will adopt this policy. I think it will be really, really good for Americans who want to buy homes. And, let's just face it, that's the American dream. It creates stability, it creates pride of ownership. And I also think that housing taxes should be brought down as well. Property taxes are very high. It depends on what state you're in, but there's a lot of other ways in which you can generate revenue. I don't know the percentages of what the state's revenue is, but even if we brought it down by, let's say, 10%, then it would make it more affordable for people. Where I'm at in Northern California, it's around 1.25%. So if you buy $1 million house, it's literally over $1,000 a month for just taxes for the house. That doesn't even include your mortgage or your insurance. That's just an extra burden that has to be bared by the consumer. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to mention about this is it's essentially a government subsidy. Whether or not you agree with government subsidies is a whole nother issue that's very complex, and I don't really have the time to dive into that. What I can say is that there will be some effects of this, and I just wanted to bring up a chart. Let's see, make sure I get the right one. This is a calculation that I did, and what this is the average price of a home, and then when you calculate out the entire interest rate of how much you have to repay for a home, that's the second line here in blue. And you can see that home prices fluctuate. They fluctuate a little bit here, but actually the real affordability of a house is determined by the interest rate. There's literally half of the deal is the price, and the other half is going to be the interest rate. So this shoot up here after 2010 is really because they lowered interest rates. So 2008, during the financial crisis here, you can see that homes reached let's just say a $200,000 average home, you had to pay back around $550,000 when the interest rates were high. When those interest rates crashed, that brought it all the way down to around $350,000 at this trough right here, which is $200,000 difference in just a few years. But the trade-off of that is that home prices surged up, and you can see that home prices have continued in that surge since then. So if they implement a government-backed 3% mortgage, it will send housing prices skyrocketing, but they will be more affordable overall. There's a magic moment where interest rates go down, but housing prices haven't skyrocketed yet. And you can see on this graph that around $350,000 to around $600,000 is that difference. Again, that's a $250,000 difference in the ultimate repayment cost had you bought your house merely a few years later. The actual price of houses had gone up from about $250,000 to, let's just say, $325,000. That's a $75,000 difference. However, the total repayment costs had gone up by $250,000. So in this sense, you can see that interest is a bigger deal than housing prices. So what I would recommend to anybody, be ready for either an interest rate drop, because the same thing will happen if there's a crisis with political uncertainty and they drop interest rates again, then there will be a magic moment where houses are cheap and interest is cheap. These are also relative terms here, which we can still talk about how much if housing prices are still overvalued. But being ready for this magic moment is what's going to save a homeowner literally a third of the amount of money. So $250,000 difference over 30 years, well, you start to see now that that's $8,000 a year extra that could be in your pocket for being prepared when the housing market changes. So I just wanted to address, there are some other things proposed here in California. We'll get to that one. So here's some proposed bills in California that would also address some of these issues. Assembly Bill 2584, written by Alex Lee, would ban institutional investors from buying or investing in additional single-family home properties and then renting them out. There's another bill here that would go a step further, and it would ban institutional investors from purchasing, acquiring, or leasing any single-family or duplex for any reason. And the last one would ban developers from selling homes in bulk to big investors. It's risky to build 50 or 100 houses in a subdivision because prices fluctuate and all that. So often they just want to sell it off to a giant company like BlackRock. So these are just some of the ways in which the affordability crisis is trying to be addressed. Okay. Are houses overvalued? Yes. And this is going to depend on your state. Obviously, this is all a ratio of your income to how much the house costs. My general rule that I like is under 10 years. So let's just say if you make $100,000 a year, or your family income is $100,000, and you buy $1 million house, if you had no other expenses, you could pay your house off in 10 years. Obviously, there's other expenses, but that's my benchmark, and I try to do those calculations when looking at houses for myself. So this is a graph by the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, which you can go look at, and they have lots of different charts. Median sales price of homes sold in the United States. So you can see here that this is kind of going up at a certain angle, and then in the 2008, before 2008, during that bubble, the houses shot way up, and then they had a mean reversion here. So after that, you can see that the rate of increase actually continued to go up. So we've since had times change, so I'm not expecting it to be a constant here across everything. But you can definitely see that after 2010, when interest rates were all the way down, that housing prices have shot all the way up. After COVID here, there was a phenomenal increase in housing. It went from around 300,000 to, let's just say, $430,000 or $40,000. So that's a huge increase in houses. Since then, the housing has come down a bit, but to even revert to this new mean, houses on average would have to go down to around $300,000. So this if, for example, someone adopts Kennedy's 3% federally backed mortgages, it probably will not revert to this mean. That's a fundamental shift in the housing market. Now, you could sit and calculate exactly the percentage of homes and new home buyers and factor this into a relative weighting of the market. However, just looking at this quickly, you can see that we have around another $100,000 or another 30% for houses to come down to be affordable on a mean reversion. That's not to say that actually, if we looked at this graph and we took this previous trend line here, it looks like it would have to come down to around $280,000. So essentially what's happened here, because of the Fed's mismanagement of interest rates. Now, just as a note, the interest rates are tied to a number of things in the government, and one of those happens to be the housing rate, but they're also tied to the stock market, they're tied to government bonds, and a lot of other factors in the economy. So what's happened is that these two have been linked together, which RFK is trying to bifurcate them, and I think that that is a wonderful idea. So basically, yes, right now housing is overvalued on a technical sense, and that'll depend on your state. You know, there's a lot of states that are pulling these way up. And to be honest, luxury housing is a bit more of investment and it skews it. So, you know, if you look at this with single family homes that are actually lived in by regular Americans, this would be an entirely different chart. But the luxury has pulled this up. And those are 10, 20, $30 million penthouses out of New York and all that stuff that nobody lives in. So whether or not you want to subsidize a sector of the American economy is a huge debate. You know, you can go into Adam Smith's free hand of the market and all of that kind of stuff. But I just want to show that we are already a heavily subsidized economy. So I'm going to pull this back up here, and I just found this. This is a subsidy tracker. So the housing market is already subsidized in a way. So they already have a subsidized loan. Now, it's not directly subsidized. It's what's called an insured loan by the government, and that's an FHA loan. And if you just go to Investopedia here, we can see real quick that FHA loans are mortgages intended for certain borrowers who might find it difficult to obtain loan otherwise. The federal government insures an FHA loan, which basically means if you get one of these loans and you default on it, the government will pay that bank. So there's X number of people who default, more during crises, obviously, but the government is subsidizing a certain sector of the banking industry, which has to do with mortgage loans. However much that is, and the proportionality is, you know, a long debate, and we could look at all the numbers. I did not pull that all up for that. It's not the exact purpose of this video. That is a little subsidy. John F. Kennedy is talking about a larger subsidy because right now, you know, mortgage people, they're saying, we'll loan you money for this house at $4,000 or 6.5% interest, $4,000 per month. JFK is saying, we will now subsidize that down to, let's just say, $3,000. His calculations, which he didn't show the math on, said that it would bring it down by $1,000. So that means that the government is going to subsidize, essentially, $1,000 a month for X number of homes, probably for first-time home buyers. So I just came over to this subsidy tracker, and I just wanted to show, if you have some qualm about subsidizing the housing market, which I personally don't, provided that we are still subsidizing other places. I could pose a lot of arguments against subsidies, and a lot of them have to do with the efficiency of the free market. The reason that we had the 2008 financial crisis is because there wasn't a free market, and there was a lot of substandard loans that were being issued that would never have been taken on as debt in a free market. So here's just some subsidies that I found really interesting. Boeing. This is $15 billion. That's going to be 400. Yes, $15 billion. And I'm not sure exactly the time frame of this. It doesn't show that. But you can see here that basically Boeing's got 15 billion, Intel has 8 billion, Ford Motor has 7 billion, General Motors has another 7 billion, Micron Technology has 6 billion, Amazon.com 5 billion. I'm actually surprised at that one. And you can go down the list here. I wonder how many of these are actually Fortune 500 companies and listed, for example, on the S&P 500 or the Russell 2000, which is the top 2,000 stocks of the indices. The point is that BlackRock and all these other companies, as RFK said, owns 88% of the stock market, which I have not looked into. But these are all companies, a lot of these. I could almost guarantee that every single one of these is listed on the stock market. What does that mean? That means that BlackRock and all these other big companies, I don't mean to be picking on BlackRock, I'm sure there's other ones, are getting their returns artificially inflated. Do you think it might be a good idea to own Boeing at a certain point if they get a $15 billion subsidy? We can look up all of these, or we could add up all of these different subsidies. We can save this in a CSV file and then add them up. But essentially, the government is pumping tremendous amounts of money into the stock market. And what does that do? That makes the companies who own the stocks returns much higher. That gives them allocated capital so they can go spend it on things like single family housing or multi-unit housing, apartments, or commercial real estate. You know, that's another thing that banks are heavily into. So the point is that if we're gonna subsidize something, we are currently subsidizing the stock market with billions. I don't even know, it might be $1 trillion over the last 10 years. That does not go to the American public. I forgot the exact statistic, but it was like 80% of stocks are owned by the top 10% of American income earners. So what does that mean? That means the regular people like you and me, we're all priced out of houses because of all these subsidies that put an imbalance to the market. So, you know, if someone has an issue with now subsidizing the housing market for the average consumer, I say that that is absolutely ridiculous. All of this should be reversed, in my opinion. 3% mortgage isn't enough. First-time home buyers, how about 1% or maybe even 0% interest? I know that during the COVID crisis, there was a bunch of loans that were at 0% interest and you didn't even have to pay them back. My question is, why is the government subsidizing stocks instead of the housing market? And you know why? Is because the government monitors stocks as part of how well the economy is doing. So there's something that's called, I believe it's called financialization, where it's the amount of the economy that's continually gobbled up by giant corporations. And I'll just give you a couple of examples here. Amazon has put a lot of small businesses out of business. And it used to be Walmart, but all of those small businesses, they didn't have stock. You know, let's just say, you know, the custom knife maker down the street. He did not have stock in his company that you could go buy. He wasn't listed on NASDAQ. So when that person gets put out of business and those knives are now sold through Amazon, then they have stock in which reflects the sales of that. So if that goes down, that larger piece of the economy is then metric to be lower. So now, as a country, we are hypersensitive to stock prices instead of things like affordability for houses. So this is the kind of reason why I absolutely back subsidizing houses for average Americans. So I hope this just helps you understand about the housing market and how we can help fix it and who's actually trying to address these issues. So as always, my name is Aaron Rosen, your local realtor in Northern California. If you'd like a personal consultation on how best you can maximize the value out of your house, just because all this is going on does not mean you should not own a house. Yes, houses are expensive, but if you do the math, and I'm perfectly willing to do this on a house, I didn't pull this up, but I'll make another video about this. Is it better to buy a high-priced house now and refinance later, let's say in 2 or 3 years when interest rates go down? Or is it better to save up money and then to buy a house when interest rates go down? If you do the math, it's almost always better to buy a house now and refinance later. So just because things are volatile and overpriced does not mean that it is not a good idea to buy a house. This is something that I specialize in helping people figure out exactly when and where is the best time to buy a house. If you have any questions, all my contact information is below. Thank you very much.